All right, so we have covered pretty much the plethora of church history. And tonight's our last night. I don't have as much details for you tonight as I normally have in the past because I really would like us to have a conversation. Now, when I say that, I don't want to have a conversation with Jim. I want to have a group discussion here, okay? And that's why I've invited the youth to kind of talk about some things as to, well, where do we go from here? We've covered a lot of theological issues. We've debated several of them. We've gone through a lot of the Baptist history and how Baptists got here and how we got to this point. And I could have done a review, but I kind of want to see what our discussion is on, well, now that we have this information, we've looked at the things that worked for church history. We've looked at some of the things that didn't work. We've looked at attitudes and how people throughout history came to know who Christ was. Okay? So today, I'm going to give you some information, but we're going to ask some questions, okay? And we're going to start with this one, which is, where are we now? So we had covered the early 1900s, and I do want to stress that I had a lot more planned from the 1900s up to now, but I ran out of time. I did not think that we were going to take as long on some of the things as we did, because we did have good discussions, and I thought they were important things to hit as we went through. When I outlined this whole thing out a year and a half ago, we covered a lot of things that I didn't have in my outline, because I was like, we've got to hit that as we were going through the history, okay? So I did want to discuss a lot more of the 1950s up till now, but we're just going to go here to say, well, where are we now? So in 1972, the SBC reported 445,725 baptisms. This is the most of any year. Okay? It was the highest from every previous year, and we've never hit that number since. Okay, so 1972 was the height of baptisms for the SBC. Okay? The SBC says it baptized 180,177 people in 2022, which is up 60,000 from the previous year of 2021. Okay? So there's a drastic difference. You're talking nearly 300,000 people difference between 1972. Here's what they say, okay? This was in 2014, I read this, okay? I didn't put those numbers in there. But in 2014, it took 51 Baptists to baptize one person. In 1972, it took 9. So what that means is for every 9 Baptist church members, there was 1 baptism. In 2014, there was 51 church members to 1 baptism. Okay? So our numbers have been shifting. So when we look at that, so in that 40 years, okay, 80s, 90s, no, those 50 years, okay, in that 50 years, we dropped nearly 300,000 baptisms. So why do you think there's been a drastic decline in baptism since 1972? Like I said, I wanted it to be a discussion. What do you think? Different attitudes, mentality. Yeah, okay.
I would say it's because it now takes 51 church members for every one person instead of 9.
Yeah. That's just a number to say that, for every, how many should it be, right? One for one. Every person is an evangelist. There you go. We never hit those numbers, but that would be awesome. I mean,
Were there more SBC churches in 72 than there is now?
nope, there was far less.
I would say the introduction of the internet and all the apps and the push that TV has done and movies to snap
Okay.
people.
So, technology has moved us past that. Okay, technology gets in the way. Okay,
Decline in the family,
decline in family.
yeah.
Okay,
Too many breakups and divorces and his and yours
Okay.
and mine, and they go here and there and there.
yeah. None of these answers are incorrect. Okay, because to be honest, no one knows why. We can only speculate. So, the heads of everything have speculated that there are 8 possible reasons for the decline in baptisms for the SBC. Okay, we're not talking because baptisms have declined for everyone. Okay, it's not just Baptists. That's every denomination has declined. Okay, at least in the United States and Europe. Okay, when we're talking SBC, we're mostly talking about the United States. There's not a lot of Southern Baptist churches in Europe. Okay, there's Baptist churches, but there's not a lot of Southern Baptist churches. Okay, so here's the eight possible reasons. 1, decline in cultural baptisms. Meaning this, okay? There used to be a stigma of if you didn't go to church, you weren't a contributing member of society. Like you needed to be involved in church somehow, somewhere. And so there was that pressure put on people, young people, to get into church. And so when you walk into church, we go, well, we're ready to baptize you. So they weren't real baptisms. They were just people who wanted to keep up the social, they wanted to be seen as socially acceptable. Okay? So now that we've moved away from that, because in today's culture, that stigma isn't there. We don't have to be engaged in church in order for people in the community to accept us, right? So that being one. So there's a decline in just baptizing people because they're walking through your door. Okay. The other one is great economic affluence. So we're wealthier than we used to be. Even the poor people in our society are wealthier than 90% of the world. Okay. We're wealthier than we were 100 years ago. Because 100 years ago, we were in a Great Depression or headed towards a Great Depression. Wealth wasn't, I went and, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity, I went and visited Jerry and Patty last night, and he was telling me stories about when he was a kid, and it's a completely different world than I grew up in, okay, how he grew up. So just, we don't need to depend on church or those things anymore. So economic affluence is greater in America than it was prior to the 70s, okay? Failure to replace programmatic evangelism. What was that? What were the things that we started in the early 1900s as Southern Baptists? What were some? Sunday school, right? Training union. All of those things that were reaching people, teaching people, became, well, let's move on, and then it wasn't replaced with anything. Okay, it was removed and then wasn't replaced. Okay, so a lot of those programs, and I remember in the early 2000s, that was the big push. Get away from programs, get away from programs, get away from programs. And then in the 2010s, you'd go to these conferences and they were like, hey, you guys got rid of your programs, but you didn't replace it with anything. So we're not baptized, we're not reaching people effectively. So those churches that stopped doing Sunday school, what did they do instead? Well, some of them, yeah, but some of them just got rid of Sunday school. When they stopped doing training union, what did we do instead? Okay, so it was the failure to replace those programs. Then there's the busyness of churches. Just churches have so much going on. You got, I mean, every week there's something new, and it burns people out. So people, if the church life ever brings you stress, you're doing it wrong. And I've known a ton of people, not pastors, I'm talking just lay members who were stressed out because of the work they had to do for church. They get burned out because churches are just busy. They're just busy places sometimes. So busyness of churches burning people out. Then there's the busyness of church members. I can't tell you how many, if my kids want to play soccer, they're going to have to play on Sunday. They're going to have to play on Saturday. Or we don't play because half their games might be on a Sunday or Saturday, especially those that are going to tournaments. Tournaments last Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Then we're just busy. We fill everything up, right? If we were to say, hey, you know what? We're going to start a new thing, not on Wednesdays, but Monday nights. We're going to have a new church meeting. How many people are coming? Not many. Why? Because Monday night is already filled up. Monday night something's already happening. Okay? Whether that's, work related or family or whatever, church members got busier. 6, unbiblical concepts of church membership. I put on there with the country club mentality. Church isn't what it's supposed to be. Church became like a country club. This is my social hour. I am here to consume, not to give. Okay, and so church became more of a country club setting, which we know that happened. We know that I've been in churches that were country club type churches, like you're new there and you're not accepted because you're not part of the people. The church that my wife and I got married in was known as, since it's in Bartlesville, was known as the Phillips Church. And if you weren't an executive at Phillips, then that probably wasn't the church for you. Okay? That's where the higher-ups went at one point in time. It's not that way now, but that at one point in time, that's what it was. That was its reputation. Until they got a pastor that kind of changed those things. But churches did that. They became country clubs, and it's an unbiblical concept of church membership. Dissension and conflict. Anybody ever been in a church split? Usually, in my experience, when a church split happens, the wrong group leaves. Okay? The group that should stay, the ones that would build the church, are the ones that usually leave. And then the ones that are left are the ones that take control, and this is my church, right? That a lot of times that happens in church splits. So dissension and conflict, what does that do in a community?
People away.
Right, it can destroy the reputation of the church and destroy what it can do in the community, and it takes a lot of work to come back to overcome that. So dissension and conflict can push people away. And then prayer deficits. We're not praying like we should. We don't have that powerful prayer. We just pray because it's what we're supposed to do. So these are, when I say that this is, this isn't my list, okay? I got this from some SBC higher ups. But this is the list that they put forward and said, this is kind of what we think are some of the 8 possible reasons for church decline of baptism. So what do you think of these reasons for church decline? Do you think it is accurate? You think that list is what happened? Tell you what, we'll look at the other question. Which ones do you think are the most prevalent in your experiences? So let's look at the list. Okay. So, what do you think? You think that is a contributing factor to the decline of church baptisms? 3 is failure to replace programmatic evangelism. Okay. We'll get to that here in a little bit. Yeah.
People that are doing a bunch of other stuff, they have jobs, or maybe you're taking care of other responsibilities, and that keeps them from always being part of the church.
Are people too busy? Does it affect how we worship?
Well, like in some churches, they have multiple different times that they'll do, like 3 sermons in a row, 3
Mm-hmm.
worship just so they can like have different schedules for different people, because different people have different.
Yep. Yeah.
I think those are more excuses than they are reasons.
Excuses? What do you mean by that?
Well, we do what we want to do, first of all. If you want to do something, you'll find a way to do it. If you really want to do something, you'll find a. So I think the question that has to be asked, what do we really need or want a church for? What's our real purpose for church? And it's to worship God. And to me, what we've done is we've created a lot of reasons why we don't want to do that, because we really don't want to worship God.
Okay.
You know, that means I've got to recognize a higher power. It's not me. I think these are outcroppings, all legitimate outcroppings, but outcroppings of humanism.
Okay. So if by some miracle or something, everybody just lost their schedules and the church wasn't busy and people weren't busy, you think you're still going to have the same results? Because they'll find another excuse.
I think so.
Okay. No, I'm not. No, I mean, I agree. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've talked with people that were like, I'll tell you one story of a lady. When I was in Bacosha, I went and visited her. She called the church and said, "Hey, I need some help with some groceries. We just moved into town," and it was, she needed help, and so we helped her with some groceries. and got talking to her, and she kept asking me like theological questions, and so I'd answer her theological questions, and she told me, she's like, well, nobody will ever answer my questions, but you do. I'm like, well, that's what I try to do. I like to answer questions. And then I said, well, we'd love to have you at church. And she goes, well, I can't go to your church. I was like, why? Because it's a Baptist church. I was like, well, you can accept our food, but you can't come, right? Well, I didn't say that to her, but that's kind of what I'm thinking, because in reality, it had nothing to do with us being a Baptist church. She just didn't want to go to church. She just wanted the help. She wanted the handout, but she didn't want the hand up, right? So yeah. I think there's something to it, but let me ask you this. Do you think that maybe when we started to first decline, okay, you think these might have paid? I mean, there's a difference between 1973 and 2022 or 2023, okay, especially when it comes to the attitude of the people around the church and in the community. So you think maybe these were contributing and now that's where they are? I don't want to worship God. But churches fighting, because Southern Baptists, I'm sorry, probably the denomination that has the most fights. Okay, we probably have more church splits than any other denomination because we're autonomous. Okay, that autonomy is going to foster that, okay? If people are getting upset in a Methodist church, you get the bishop comes down, he straightens it out. He's like, this church isn't splitting. If you don't agree with Methodist theology, you can go down the road, okay? We don't do that, okay? We just say, we like the carpet green, we like it red, boom, we're splitting, okay? So the SBC is known for its fighting. Okay, because we're autonomous. So I would say that I don't think that there is one thing, okay? There's not one thing that we can point to. And we could probably add 8 others, 16 others, 100 others to this list. This is their list to say, these are what we think are the possibilities, because it's speculation. We don't know why there was a 300,000 person decrease between 1972 and year 2022. We just don't know why. One thing is for sure. We're not evangelizing like we should be or like we once were. And maybe that's also not true. Maybe it's just our evangelism is less effective. Okay? So when we look at these questions, I don't know if any of them are more prevalent than the others, but I would say that probably all of them, excuses as they may be, are probably contributing factors somewhat to a decline that's been happening. So how can we recover and move forward? So the same people, this is Tom Rayner and Jason Allen, who's the president of Midwestern Theological Seminary up in Kansas City. They put out a book, and this is some of the things they talked about. They put out the previous list, and they're going to put out this one on how can we recover and move forward. Okay, 1, churches need strong biblical foundation. They need to believe in the inerrancy and the infallibility of God's word. If we're going to move forward, this is what they say we need to do as a church. Okay? So,
Well, you leave that, though.
okay.
And I agree with
I won't leave it.
Okay, I agree with that, but in our culture, let's get back to our excuses. In our culture today, I can state just about anything I want to believe.
Mm-hmm.
I can publish it or state it in any number of fashion, and I don't want somebody telling me that I can't, bend that
Right.
the way I want, and that becomes a real stickler. One of many. That becomes one of the real stickler points.
Right. So, but if we're going to move forward, okay, part of their argument was that the SBC did allow that liberalism to come in, and it took over a lot of our institutions. And those institutions have been fighting really hard to get back to this, okay? Southern Baptists have always been that. Baptists have been that, okay? And if we're going to move forward, then that is what must happen, to the point that we would be willing to die for that statement. That I believe that the Bible is infallible. And you can go and tell me all you want that a person can play God themselves and change their gender identity, but God's word says otherwise. We have to do that if we're going to move forward. Because if we give up on that, then we can't. We won't win anyone. We'll win them to a false gospel. We'll be like the Galatians who are turning so fast from the gospel that was preached to them. Okay? So this one, I think we definitely must do, and if we're going to move forward, even if it is to less baptisms. Okay? That we have to take our stand right there. 2, churches need to be intentional about evangelism. Members must be intentional about sharing their faith in today's culture. So, if we're going to win people, then churches are going to have to be intentional about sharing the gospel in today's culture. Okay? 3, churches must utilize small groups in today's evangelism. Small groups practice community, develop relationships, and discuss the Bible. This one might be the one that we're going to contend with the most out of all of them. But here, this one is built on studies. What does...
That makes all the sense in the world to me. That makes all the sense in the world in the bigger arenas. Where it doesn't make sense, or as much sense, is in the small country rural church. This
Small groups?
community.
Right,
This is,
right.
To me, I understand what they're saying. I'll shut up. 'Cause you don't need to argue.
We're not arguing.
No, we're not.
This is a discussion.
It seems like it's a failure to recognize that one model doesn't fit all.
Right.
And when so many of our churches are of the smaller churches and the rural churches, we're still operating in a 1930s environment. We are the cultural center of this community. Maybe not Hillside, but the First Baptist Church of Tallahassee is the cultural center of Baptist in that small town. And when they get together, in essence, they are already a small group. You see what I'm saying?
Right, yes.
Can they break up? Can they get smaller? Can they go? Yes. What was it we were doing? Go out, get a buddy. Go out and knock on doors 2 by 2 kind of thing. But it really does kind of bother me a little bit that we don't have 500 apartment complexes right across the street.
Not yet.
Not yet. We don't have thousands of roofs. yet.
Right.
And granted, those things have exploded around the globe.
Mm-hmm.
Population's what, 6 times greater than it was when I was your age. We thought it was a big deal when they hit in billions. We just danced right past that and kept on going.
Yeah, we're going to hit 10 billion.
Yeah, I see, so it does make sense that China has 25 to 30 cities bigger than New York City.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it makes sense that but one size doesn't fit all.
Right. And if I take a poll and I call a bunch of Baptist churches or people in New York City and I say, hey, how can we reach you? Small group, small group, small group. And then I turn around and tell Hillside Baptist Church, hey, look, the poll is saying that small groups are what's going to do it. Then, obviously that's not going to work. However, my argument, my counter discussion point would be, what does the next generation want? Even out here. All right? So what I'm telling you, I'm giving you information based on their research, okay? I agree. One size doesn't fit all, and I hate it when they tell me how to build a church in the country, which is, well, yeah, that works if you have, they give me a program on how to build a church, and I'm like, yeah, that works if you do have an apartment complex right across the street. All right? But just what I'm relaying what they're saying, okay? They believe that small groups is where people practice community, develop relationships, and discuss the Bible, which isn't actually, I mean, what was Sunday school?
I think a lot of times you get the first two and you don't get the third one. They're willing to come together and be a community and talk about things, but
Right.
there's a Bible in there.
oh, they practice community, develop relations. Well, that's the other thing, yeah.
It was the social.
But once again, we have to be intentional about evangelism. So, okay, let's go on to the fourth one, and then we can discuss. Okay, churches must be vibrantly intentional about prayer. I use that's their words, okay? Vibrantly intentional about prayer. So these are the four reasons or four ways that, now, if I was to say, all right, how do I build my church? And they just gave me these four things. I'm like, that's so very vague, right? Yeah, we want to be intentional. We probably could have come up with that list on our own. But we pay them the big dollars to do it. But this is what they're saying. And so this is what we say, okay, let's say, what do you think? You think these are, as vague as they are, what churches need to center on to move forward?
I think it's legitimate.
Okay.
We would word it differently, and we would probably have conceptually I'd paint a different picture with it than what I see painted in those words.
Okay.
But we need the foundation of the Bible. We need to be, evangelism needs to be a passion of ours. And that
Okay.
can be, that can be small, okay? And how do we do that passion? We get together and we go out and we visit and or invite or whatever, and we do it on a small scale. I think
Yep.
that's in there. And then we must be intentional about prayer. I certainly agree. Why in the world do we ever make a decision without praying about it? And how many times have we done it? So, to me,
Mm-hmm.
we're not passionate about us as a whole, as a Southern Baptist. We're not passionate about worshiping God. And if we're going to worship God passionately, those things are going to be characteristics that we will listen
You find it odd that worship isn't even mentioned?
to. I know it.
I don't know.
I didn't see that in there.
All right. So here's a few things we need to think about. Okay? Don't let this upset you. Okay? This is just what is. All right? Here's the first thing. There are currently 7 generations active in the church. 7 generations. Here they are. You have the greatest generation born between 1901 and 1927. There's not many of them left, but there might be a few. Okay? So maybe 6 active and 1 that's... Okay? The silent generation, often referred to as the builders, is born between 1928 and 1945. Okay? So if you were born before 1945, that's the generation that you are in. Then there's the boomers, the group born between 1946 and 1964. So if you fall in there, you would be part of the boomer generation. Generation X, stuck in the middle, 1965 and 1980. That is my generation. All right? This is the generation that is least likely to be in church. They are the highest generation, the most likely to be a part of a home church. Then you have the millennials born between 1981 and 1996, which is my wife, is right there. We're actually part of a subgroup because I'm born at the tail end of Generation X and she's born at the very beginning of millennials. We're a subgroup called Xennials. Okay, so even within this, there are subgroups, okay? So, but the millennials are born there. Then you have Generation Z, born between 1997 and 2012. And then you have an emerging generation, the one that Verity will be a part of, is Generation Alpha, born between 1912 and 2025 is their best estimate as to when that one will end. This is the first generation born completely in the new millennium. Okay. So, 7 active generations. This has never happened before in history. There's never been 7 generations. The most you've ever had before this was 4. And we just went to 7. Okay? Remember, because think about this. The silent generation and the greatest generation probably never met their great-grandparents. They were probably long gone before they were born. Now, we have great-grandparents on a regular basis. We live longer. We have generations. Keep in mind, some of these generations, especially the boomers, have spent the last 70 years in church. They were born in church, and they're still in church. Okay? Generation X was a mass exodus of church members. Okay? Now, I'm not here to say anything about any generation. Okay? For whatever reason, they were. Mostly because Generation X doesn't believe that they were ever accepted in the church, that they were overlooked. Okay? My generation, Generation X, was the first generation. We were the latchkey kids. Our parents, both parents had to work. We were at home by ourselves. We were just overlooked. All right? And then millennials come along, and that's the biggest argument going on right now in churches. Millennials or boomers. Nobody cares about Generation X. How are we going to... I've never had a discussion on how do we reach Generation X. But I've been many discussions on how do we reach millennials. I was even talking to a guy who was like, man, we need to figure out how to reach millennials. And I told him, and he didn't like it, but I told him, I was like, if you don't have them, you're not getting them. You missed them. They're turning 40 years old, and we're still talking about how to reach them. We need to be talking about Generation Alpha now. How are we going to maintain them in church? How are we going to reach them as they emerge into the world? It's Generation Z right now is the ones that are first. They're turning 18. They're getting jobs. They're going to become contributors. How are we going to reach them? This, once again, this has never happened in church. So all of that history we went through didn't have this going on. Okay? So, if churches are going to survive, then they must realize that the way to reach a boomer is not the same way to reach a millennial or a Generation Z. What do you think? Think that's a true statement?
Well, I mean, yeah.
Yeah? You do. And you are a Z, right?
Yeah, I don't like my generation very much, but
Well, I'm Generation X. Nobody liked us. So you think that it's different?
yeah.
Why?
Well, I don't know. I mean, like, you go somewhere and you tell someone about something and they either just don't care or, I mean, that may be the same way for some people
Mm-hmm.
back then, but like you said, it was a cultural thing, so at least they were learning or knew about it or had some interaction with it. But a lot of people now just want to live for themselves regardless, and the world tells them that that's okay, instead of it being like they're doing it because they want to and they're going against the norm.
Okay. Okay. So you think it's a true statement? If we're going to reach millennials and Generation Z, then it's going to have to be look differently than how we reach the boomers. Okay? So what practices did the church use to reach the boomer generation?
That's where you saw great tent revivals.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you
Yeah.
saw massive kinds of events like that. You didn't have any way to communicate other than through newspaper
Mm-hmm.
or radio, AM radio, as that came along. And so,
Well, the boomers are the first generation to massively watch television.
right, but they didn't start that till after the 50s. And even in the there was a crossover even in the 50s. There was still, even though television, guess what? Television would broadcast a tent revival.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You know, so you had that kind of mix that was still going on. And so that's how you got your information. You learned about things. Your relationship with the newspaper boy was real important because he brought your news to you, your front porch. And that's how you knew what was going on, whether there was a fight in the community or a split in the church or whatever it was.
Splitting the church made the newspaper.
Well,
Sure, there was always a gossip lady that,
but, so, because it affects me, it affects us.
Yeah.
Levi, you're not gonna read the newspaper, are you? How many newspapers you have delivered to your house? You don't need a newspaper, do you?
I don't need a newspaper because I don't have a parrot.
Yeah, you don't need to. Point is, you get your news, you get your information from other sources. And
How
yet,
reliable are those sources these
Huh?
days? And how reliable are some of those
Well,
sources these
yeah.
days?
Well, Gen Z,
the picture you showed me.
Gen Z actually reads a lot more than, as far as articles and stuff. They have a lot. Like there's blogs and everything. They can get all kinds of different things, podcasts and different stuff. They're a very connected generation as far as there's a plethora of information that goes in front of their eyes. Okay?
But we're to spread the good news.
Yep.
We are really to be information providers.
Mm-hmm. So
Our task is to go into the world and spread.
I want to go back to your tent revivals.
Okay.
Okay? Why do you think tent revivals don't work anymore? Because Billy Graham's not here to run them, all right?
They're uncomfortable. They're hot.
no air
Parking's not good. It takes a lot of time. Why do I have to do that when I can sit at home and watch it on TV if I really want to see it?
Okay?
I would say it's because I had never even heard of a tent revival before now.
You know Brother Love's Travel and Show, right?
Yeah,
That's about a tent revival. He's like, so tent revivals were a big thing. They got people engaged, okay? And I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, we just need to have a tent revival. And I don't do tent revivals. There's a reason. We could do it, And if we had a tent revival, who would show up? One.
These people in this.
The people in the church, right?
Yeah.
That's not what it's for, right? Okay. 2, tent revivals are hard, are less effective because boomers, you would use them. I'm not just saying boomers. You know, those when those were popular, they were also entertainment value. Okay, that's what was going on in town. We were less busy, and it was what was going on. Everybody knew. Okay. Yeah, it was a group meeting. It was family reunions. It was great. Okay. Now, we don't use those as for entertainment. 3rd, the boomer generation was the last generation that prayed in school, which meant there was other things that were going on in the schools. Okay? You could read how Adam ate the apple. A. B, was B is for Bible. Okay? You would have those in public school. So there was already an information that was given to people, and when they came to the tent revival, they just needed a little nudge because they already had the base information. Now, they don't have that base information. So some guy starts yelling about how you need to get saved because of your sins. They go, what do you mean? You need to explain that point a little bit more. So tent revivals lost their effectiveness because the generations changed. It was the same with door-to-door evangelism. Now, we could still do door-to-door and invite people to church and have community. But it used to be you could go people's door, knock on the door, hand them a tract, and they'd go, yeah, I kind of want that. Let's do that. And people would get saved on their porches. That because they already had a base. They already had a small education on the Bible. And that all went away in the 1960s when we took prayer out of school. And then we started removing other things. And then teachers couldn't share their faith. And then all this other, you couldn't wear Christian t-shirts or anything like that. Okay, now I understand there's some of those big cities. Like I could probably go to McLeod School and wear a Christian t-shirt, but...
But as an example, when I was in grade school was out on Good Friday.
Okay.
We met, all the classes, the entire school, went to the biggest church in town, which happened to be the Methodist church. And we went to a Friday service as a school. I mean, it was a holiday. And so you had all of that, but you were exposed to all of that. Yes, you had prayer. Yes, you had Pledge of Allegiance. Yes, you had those things. But you had a Christmas program too.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a Good Friday program.
Right. So and so people were exposed in ways that they are not today. So why won't these practices work to reach millennials or Generation Z? So like training union, that was big for boomers and the builders on evangelizing people. Sunday school was big for reaching out and evangelizing. Okay, not saying that they don't work, not saying that they won't work. But here's the thing, okay? There was a reason I walked you guys through this. We have 7 generations in the church. And they all think very differently than the previous generation. Okay? I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think the most rebellious generation out of those 7 is?
The boomers.
That's right. It is. The boomers were the most rebellious generation. They were described as this. They would go into church wearing a shirt and tie with a tie-dye shirt underneath. right? His appearances, the Beatles started out singing I Want to Hold Your Hand and then ended on songs with Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And if you interpret that as LSD, then, okay? That's how they started out. Okay? The rebellion, but why was it? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. What was their thinking? They were moving into a me. And when they were at the height in 1983, it was a me way of thinking. Okay? That doesn't mean that that selfishness, it's just what is the most important, the individual or the group. Okay? For the boomers, that generation, they were rebelling against their parents because their parents were what? We. They thought in those terms. The greatest generation were we thinkers. They were group, okay? We fought Nazism. We stood against communism. Okay? You say, but those are group thinks. They are. That was Germany's group think. That was China's group think with Mao, was communism. Socialism was Russia's groupthink. America had liberty and freedom, and together we're taking on the world. Okay? So that was our groupthink, right? We went to liberate the world. And then we moved into this individual, the individual is more, I'm going to change the world. If I'm going to change the world, it's going to start with me. Okay? What is it now? We're going to change the world. Okay? So the Z generation, how do they think? They think, and millennials especially, think just like the boomers' parents. Which is why they're fighting. Because they want the group. They want, we experience things as a group. The group is more important. The group is more interesting. The group is more exciting than the individual. Okay? It's not in deals with selfish, because people are always selfish. Okay? It doesn't matter where you are in your timeline. I will take care of me before I take care of you is kind of everybody's mentality, right? We're self-preserving. So it's not selfishness. It's just how we think of things. Okay? So, tent revivals. What is that? It's evangelism on the extreme, okay? It's you need to make a decision for Christ today. You. I want everybody, bow your heads, close your eyes. Nobody's looking around. Raise your hand because you need Christ. Okay?
I see that hand.
Yeah, I see that hand. Even when there's no hands, they would say it. Okay? Because I looked. Okay?
We all do.
But so here's the thing. Okay? Evangelism is individualistic. What have we been talking about for the last 10 years, 20 years? Discipleship. Because discipleship is group. That's how you're going to win them. We disciple. And we're already beginning the conversation because we're on a downswing going back into the me. We're already beginning the conversation. Southern Baptist conventions are already starting to go, wait a second, we need to start focusing on evangelism. We got away from evangelism. Why? Because we were discipling. We were doing the group, and then we're going to do the individual. So in 10, 20 years, the discussion in 2043 is going to be all about evangelism. Mark my words. Okay? I'm sorry, I mean, I don't even know if I'll be around by then. But mark my words, it'll be evangelism. You'll be in church life, it'll be evangelism, not discipleship. But When you come back around, it'll be discipleship. All right? So there's a reason we went through this, because it's important that if we're going to reach Generation Z and the millennials, that we have to understand that it's this alpha generation that's going to start pushing the me thinking. Okay, so that generation, Verity's generation, they're going to start pushing the me. They're really going to, they're going to be in their 20s right here, right? They're going to be emerging into the church as we move in here. And when they start talking about, well, it's evangelism and it's the individual is going to be important. But if we're going to start witnessing and we're going to start targeting, then we're on a very delicate balance right here. Because we're going to have to market to people that are we thinkers and individual thinkers. We thinkers and me thinkers. Right? Because in 20 years, I mean, if God tarries another 80 years, okay, we might have 9 generations in the church. If medical advancements can go that far and people are, well, yeah, they hit 120, that's old age. Because of how we are with medicine and preserving ourselves, health and all of that stuff. Okay? So, what if we have 9 generations in the church? Right? So it's important for me, I would say, I think this is important as we start to look on how do we move forward. So, what are some of the things that we can do right now to reach the next generations for Christ? Who are we talking about? We're talking about Z and Alpha. Okay? It doesn't mean we ignore the millennials. It doesn't mean we ignore Generation X. It's just, what are some of the things that we can start to do now so that we're moving forward? Because ultimately, as Baptists, this is what we want. We believe in regenerate baptism. Not regenerate baptism, baptism of the believer. Okay? That baptism is a sign of showing that a person is a believer. And that's what we want. That's what God wants, right? He is not willing that any should perish, but all to come to repentance. So we're not Catholics. We don't just baptize babies and say, well, we're good. They're good. For us, it's a lot different. For us, we have to say, in order for them to go through those waters, they need to be believers. And that's a sign that they are a believer. They're uniting themselves with Christ. So as Baptists, what are we going to do so that we can get people into the baptistry as true baptisms, not just cultural, we dunked you, we set you free? So what do you think? I'm asking you guys, the young ones.
Well, I mean, first you got to get them in the door.
Okay?
Because they have to be a part of the church and like accept him as your savior before they can be baptized.
Okay?
I guess you just have to work on all of that.
So we'd have to see, well, what do they want? What's going to get them in the door?
They have to hear the word.
Well, and they're not getting it in school. They're not getting it at home. So there has to be something that's going to draw them to us. Or we have to be where they are. Those are our options, right? We either have to be out in the world evangelizing, or we have to be doing something that they say, I want to go there. So what do you think... what do you think the younger generations will be or are searching for when they look at church?
I don't think they're searching.
Disagree. I do.
I hope so.
I really do.
I don't think they're searching.
My generation isn't searching. They're not. However, this is the loneliest generation. Generation Z has expressed that they are the loneliest generation that has ever been. More of them experience depression and loneliness than any other generation before them.
Because they're
Get it
right
all
here.
on social media, right.
Got that
instead of
stuck in their
person.
face.
And is the phone a substitute community?
They're making it that way.
It's not.
It's not. And they're waking up to it. Believe me, they are.
They want somebody to validate them, to care for them.
Right? And they don't feel like they're getting it. And they're not getting it from millennial parents, okay, who have said, oh, here's a phone so that you don't cry.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm not, like I said, I'm not attacking anyone. That is just what the statistics are showing. So, where is the most likely place that they will seek out community?
I mean, you could say on here.
Okay?
Not the best place, but that's probably where they're gonna look.
But what they're finding out is that is contributing to their loneliness. Because if all you're doing things is for likes, that like button. Okay? So if you listen to the guy that created the like button on Facebook, he regrets making it. He does. Because he created it so that it was just, oh, it'd be a fun little thing. I like what you posted. But now he didn't realize that that's what people were going to crave. That was going to contribute to their self. So they post something, a picture of their dinner, and they only get 5 likes, it destroys them. I'm not kidding. I mean, we could laugh, but that's the reality of it. Okay? Where is the most likely place that people are going to seek out relationship? Oh, come on. We're the center of the community. It's church. Church is social activity. And when people start to see, wait a second, why aren't you depressed like I am? Well, I go to church. Well, what about you? Why aren't you depressed like I am? Well, I go to church. You go to church, what do? We sit around and we talk about things. We talk about life. We talk about experience. We talk about things that we do and things that we've seen. Really?
And we share food.
And we eat. Right. So, to me, here's what I see. The church has a great opportunity moving forward. Okay? You're right. You can go online and say what groups are meeting where. I want to talk to people who read comic books, and they might go to comic book conventions. Comic book conventions are on the rise. Okay? Cosplay, dressing up as your favorite superhero and going to a convention is on the rise. Okay? Why is pickleball the fastest growing sport in America?
Because old people can play it.
Because anyone can play it, and it's a social activity. Okay?
So we need to be able to think about
So here's the thing. If the church can set itself up as a social place in the middle of a community, you're going to start reaching people. But when they come in, there has to be something for them. When they come in, here's what they want to see. They want to see purpose, they want to see meaning, and they want it to be real. They don't want it to be fake and false. They want what they experience to be a real experience. So when the church says we care about missions, they want to see that the church cares about missions. More than pictures, they want to see that the church is on mission. And they want to be a part of that. When the church says we care about these things, then that's going to speak volumes to them when they see that the church actually does care about those things. Okay? If we say we love prison ministry, but we have no one going to the prison ministry, what does that communicate? We don't really care about it. Okay? We love missions. Well, what do you mean? Well, see, we have this picture of this guy, and we read his letter 20 years ago. You don't care about missions. Okay? So that's what it's going to be. I think the church is set for the future as a social gathering. If we can get that, then people will come in. Because this generation, we look at it and we say they're just so connected to their phones, and they are, okay? But I think they're pulling away from it. I think they're starting to go, this isn't good for us. This isn't healthy. There's so many studies out there, so many things. They're seeing it. It's not healthy for you to be in front of your phone all the time. Okay? It's not healthy for you to be to depend on that like button. I see those things all the time. I know that they see them too. So they're going to be looking. Now, if the church is ready, but the church has to be purposefully evangelizing, praying, that there has to be meaning when they come in, and they have to say, this is a genuine place to worship God. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to you guys and say, what do you guys think? That's it. That's all I have for church history. So so if you ask me, where are we moving? That's what I would say our church needs to move toward. Now I'm saying specifically us now, not just the SBC. What do we need to move toward? Being the community center, the social aspect, a family-friendly place, a place where people come in and they see genuine activity, they see passion, and they see people who want to serve Christ. If we do that, we'll be fine. All right? So, that's what's next. That's what's coming in September. I will say this, okay? I'm going to try to make this for everyone, but I don't know how I can make eschatology for a baby Christian, to be honest. Okay? So here's what you need to be doing. If you're going to participate in the eschatology study, which I hope all of you do, you need to be praying that that God is preparing you to have those discussions. Because eschatology is not... It is... Here's what I told people, okay? And this is what I'll tell you guys. Let me pray and we'll be done with that. Okay? So let me pray and then I'll tell you guys. All right?